Well, greetings and salutations to the 310 tribe. Hopefully, all you guys can hear and see me okay. If you can, just give me a thumbs up. Man, this is really bright. All right. Hello to everybody. Staff 1776, Sue Cawthorn, I'm his. SMS Alex, Kathy, Ashley, Kelly, my mom, hey mom, Just Vicky, Lisa, hey Lisa, Emma Brian, Marine Mom, Reading the Word, Mrs. G, D. Scott Clev, I'm assuming that's Cleveland maybe, Florida Mermaid, hello to everybody tonight. Well, we have a good program in store. I apologize for coming in a little bit late. I was just doing some last minute editing and tweaking of things. I do want to let you guys know that I just got my shirt in. And this is from, I don't know if you can see it, the 6 Percenters. And then on the back of it, it's got the 6 Percenters believe the Bible means what it says, that Jesus is coming back literally. The rapture is real. We are not appointed to wrath. Israel will be restored. The church is not Israel, and we are called to watch. I believe that's from Lauren, from Certainty for Uncertain Times. You should be able to go to her channel, and she'll probably have links to that shirt, but pretty excited about being able to wear mine very soon. Richard Browder, Cheryl Neal, Brooke, Kathy, Deborah, T-Bone. What's up, T-Bone? Coco Bear, Catalin. Got all the mods in the house tonight. Good to see everybody. JJ, NJ, blessings from Marching, Idaho. Hey, I'll be up in Idaho at the end of the month, or the end of May, rather. More on that in a little bit. I want to talk tonight about the intentional collapsing of Western civilization, and it's a lot of stuff tonight. So if we could probably limit the questions to maybe like 5 or 6, and hopefully if they're relevant to the conversation tonight, that'd be even better. I'll have to make up the questions later because I feel like this portion of it's going to go kind of long. And you know how I get. I'm long-winded anyways. But okay. And I'm trying to keep in mind all those folks out in the Eastern Standard Time. I realize this is 9 o'clock, and usually I go to about 11, sometimes midnight. So I'm trying to be mindful of that as well. But if you have to drop off, just record it or watch it tomorrow. It's fine. All right. I'll talk about the conferences and all this stuff coming up at the end. But and if you guys can remind me, I will touch on that. But this weekend, for sure, it will be in Mississippi, Flowood, Mississippi. The link is in the under the title descriptions of the video. Go check it out. It's not going to be live streamed. However, they will record it. All the speakers, myself, Alex Newman, Tom Hughes, and Chris Gaucher, and I'm assuming the musical part of it as well will be also recorded, Kathy Gaucher. So that will be available. We'll probably stream those things later on, or they will. But let's get going here. In the late 1960s, ethologist John Calhoun created Universe 25, a rodent utopia with limitless food and no predators. Instead of thriving, the population underwent a chilling psychological collapse. The rodents lost the will to breed, social hierarchies dissolved into senseless violence, and a class of beautiful ones emerged. These are individuals who did nothing but eat, sleep, and groom themselves, completely detached from reality. Let me put this over here. It'll be easier to read it. This behavioral sink serves as a haunting secular prophecy for the 21st century West, where the fulfillment of every material need has begun to trigger a similar atrophy of the human spirit. As the physical struggles of the past vanish, the end of history has birthed a Western utopia that feels increasingly hollow. In this void, we see the rise of the authoritarian technocracy that seeks to manage human behavior through digital oversight rather than moral guidance. This transition is marked by syncretic spiritual great reset where traditional distinctions dissolve. In this framework, human secularism blends with a kaleidoscope of non-Christian traditions, including Roman Catholicism, which is increasingly viewed as a bureaucratic wing of globalism, as well as all the other non-Christian faiths, such as the Sikhs, the Hindus, Islam, paganism, all the humanistic type of ideologies, whether we're talking about humanism, scientism, materialism, nihilism, existentialism, all the different isms that are currently floating around the ether for any young mind to absorb. And not only that, but we also have the inclusion now of even the occult and satanic or Luciferian faiths into the broader kaleidoscope, as it were, of different faiths that are being presented as alternatives to Christianity or the true biblical faith. And at the heart of this collapse is the rise of artificial intelligence, the introduction of digital currency and universal basic income. And while it's promised to be tools of liberation, they mirror the limitless grain hordes of Universe 25, potentially rendering human labor and purpose obsolete. Now, this trajectory culminates, or is supposed to culminate rather, in transhumanism, which is the ultimate technocratic occultism, which seeks to solve the issue of death, or the death of the soul, by merging biological life with a digital one. As we abandon the struggle that defines our species, we risk becoming Calhoun's beautiful ones, perfectly maintained, technologically enhanced, and utterly devoid of the essence that makes us human. Now, if you're asking or wondering what an ethologist is, it's a scientist who specializes in ethology, the objective and biological study of animal behavior, typically under natural conditions. And they seek to understand why animals behave as they do by examining both the proximate causes, like how a behavior happens, whether it's neurological or it's some type of psychological kind of trigger. And then you have the ultimate causes, which is, that these animals will have to I don't want to say evolve. They're not evolving physically, but they're changing habits and they're changing behaviors based on the changing conditions around them. Much in the same way that bears, who are, for example, omnivore, will increasingly come to campsites or near humans because they know there's an abundance of food that we typically keep on hand. And it reminds me, going back to, we went to Colorado years ago on a family vacation and up in the Lake City. And I remember that night that we had left these coolers. I mean, they were like strapped down. I mean, they were locked in. I mean, there weren't, like a raccoon would not be able to get into this thing. But somehow the bears did. The bears got all into the food. And I just remember they have obviously their sense of smell is incredible, but like they know humans, if there's humans there, there's going to be food products. So animals have adapted to the urbanization or the introduction of humans into their natural habitat in sometimes not so good ways. So that's an example of animals kind of changing their behavior according to the changing conditions around them. Now, give me 1 second here. All right. So I wanted just to touch base real quick on the 4 phases of his Universe 25. It was designed to be a 101 by 101 inch or a 4.5 foot cube enclosure designed as a mortality inhibiting environment for mice, and that's quotes there. They had unlimited food, unlimited water, and unlimited nesting material. They had multiple interconnected apartments and ramps and tunnels capable of supporting up to 4,000 mice. No predators. There was minimal disease exposure. It was the perfect conditions. And they started out with 8 healthy albino mice. So they had 4 males and 4 females. And just as context, this whole study was done back in 1968. So many years ago. The test for Calhoun's goal was to test what happens when all the physical needs are already met and the space is somewhat limited. And thus the social roles for these animals becomes constrained because they don't need to forage for food anymore. They don't have to compete for food. It's all just there for the taking. And it would be complete abundance. Now, obviously we can take this and we can make the correlations to humans. I understand there are other dynamics in our world today that mice necessarily don't have to deal with, things like technology or wars or, cosmic events or natural disasters, those kinds of things. So this was designed just to give them a perfect environment to see what would happen if they had that. What would change in the mice culture, as it were. All right. So he had 4 phases, or there's these 4 phases of Universe 25. Phase alpha, this is the adjustment phase from days 1 to 104. It was a initial considerable social turmoil as mice familiarized themselves with their new environment. Territory marking, nesting, and normal interactions established. The first offsprings were born around day 104, and the population is still low and functional. Phase Bravo, exploitation and rapid growth from days 105 to 315. Explosive population boom, doubled roughly every 55 days. By the end of this phase, day 315, there was over 600 mice. Resources are still abundant. Mice exhibited normal breeding and nesting and social behaviors. Gradually phase, apparent success and prosperity mirroring carefree normalcy in Noah's and Lot's day, eating, drinking, marrying, and buying and selling. So I'm marrying up this test with Calhoun with how we are in normal social society in these last days. So his Calhoun's test did not tie in Noah or Lot. So this is something I'm put in there. Phase Charlie, stagnation. So days 316 to 560. Growth slowed dramatically despite ample space and resources remaining. They reached a peak population, approximately 2,200 mice on day 560, well below the 4,000 mark capacity for how many mice that enclosure would hold. High local density in preferred areas led to behavioral sink, the voluntary overcrowding, even when other sections were empty. Emerging pathologies came forth. Increased aggression, violence, males attacking females and young, the disrupted mating, some males hypersexual or pansexual or withdrawn altogether, or they got into homosexual behaviors were also noted. Maternal neglect or infanticide, and then rising infant mortality. We start to see the social roles begin to break down. Many of the mice could not secure status or territory, leading to withdrawal. And then, applying this last part here to modern society, there's a gradual erosion of social fabric amid material plenty. Normalcy bias kept routines appearing sustainable. And then phase delta was death or collapse after day 560. Reproduction plummeted, births dropped sharply. Around day 600, population was on an irreversible path to extinction. Pathological behaviors became the dominant and contagious. And this is what's known as behavioral sink. And what emerged here was they called themselves, or they didn't call themselves, they're mice, but the Calhoun and his researchers called them the beautiful ones. It was a subgroup, mostly male. Often they were obsessively grooming themselves, eating, and rested, but avoided all social interaction, courtship, or even reproduction. They became isolated, asexual, and non-contributory. Females abandoned or attacked their own pups. Infant mortality approached 96 to 100%. In some areas, with cannibalism being reported amongst the mice. We see they also became very violent, hyper-aggressive, and socially withdrawn. The social withdrawal began to spread as the violence obviously began to spread. Now, I want to just pause here for a second, because we see in this study the same thing that Alexander Tytler had talked about in the cycle of nations, and that nations would go from some type of a hardship to overcoming that hardship, whether that's through a war or through some type of a collective struggle. And then they establish themselves in a place. They work hard, they have good work ethos, and that produces material wealth and abundance. And then out of abundance comes some of the more negative, what we would see the negative turn in the cycle, which goes from apathy, onward to dependence on whatever the system is, and then on to bondage, and then they would be back into that crisis mode. And that's the Alexander Tytler's cycle of nations, and that all nations tend to go through these cycles given enough time. Now, let me do this so you guys can see everything I'm looking at. I'm so sorry. I got like three screens going on right now. So that's the phase Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. And then the last one here, the final mouse died on May 23rd, 1973. So again, remember that this study started in 68. The last mouse died 4 years and 10 months after the start. And the colony becomes fully extinct. Suddenly phase, even with the available resources and population declining, social skills for mating, parenting, and cohesion were lost and led to the irreversible collapse. So all that to say that sometimes the abundance that we experience in life, especially living in the Western civilization, is not a good thing. And we could see it, obviously, we'll talk about here what was the causes of a lot of the destruction that we've seen come across Western civilization. And I think we're watching it in IMAX right now. We're watching in full color. We're watching Western Europe collapsing. We're watching the United States in varying forms of collapse and fractionalizing. And it's just spreading across all the industrialized nations. Now, when you go to places like Iran or China, and I'm going to exclude most of China. I'm talking about rural China, or away from the major urban areas, which there was quite a bit in China. When you go to places in the what we call the third world, the Holy Spirit is moving very powerfully in these places. And I think part of that is because the Western culture has become so jaded, and so they've so hardened their heart against the gospel, because it's just been there. It's been ever present since the founding of our country. So by the time that we time and reality catches up to where society is at that time, people have hardened their hearts. They've heard the gospel so many times, it's just white noise now, and they don't want to listen, and they're completely content with the way that their life's going at the time. All right, let me go to the next slide here. So why do I call the United States utopic? I don't think that it's we're utopic in the sense of that there's no problems whatsoever. But when you look at the rest of the world, why is the rest of the world, fighting tooth and nail and risking life and limb to travel across oceans in dinghies and little boats that could barely hold 5 people, and they've got like 50 people crammed onto this boat? Why are people being smuggled in 18-wheelers, or they're making the long trek up from Venezuela all through Central America, through Mexico, walking all the way up to get to the border of the United States. There's something about the United States that is drawing people to us in ways that it doesn't for other countries. If you're coming out of Colombia or Venezuela and you're seeking sanctuary, by international law, you're supposed to go to the first place that allows you to, the first safe place that you can get to. And the problem that we're seeing is that they're bypassing all these other places, Panama, Costa Rica, or Honduras, El Salvador, all through Mexico. They're bypassing all these places to get to the United States. And it's long been deemed that the United States is just like this land of milk and honey that we just, if you want to get rich and you want to be somebody, you have to go to the US to kind of make it there. And it was like that for a while. There was a time when anybody could come to the United States because of the way that we're structured. If you had a dream and you had some kind of means to make it happen, you had the potential to really succeed in the United States. It was a land of opportunity. But what made it that, and this is what I want to talk about, we have in the United States, we have this thing called the American dream. This American dream was not created in a vacuum. It had a bunch of ingredients that came together to help make that possible. And if we go back even to the Greeks and the Romans, I mean, a lot of what we base modern thinking on, in modern law, modern ideology, philosophy, political, politics, the way we structure our government, that all comes out of the Greco-Roman systems of government. We took a little bit, the founders took a little bit here, took a little bit there. They took what was successful here, they took what was successful there, and they put the best of those things together to make the United States. You add on top of that system, this logic-based system, you put on top of that the Judeo-Christian values that we see in Scripture, whether you're talking about the 10 Commandments or the Sermon on the Mount, or Old and New Testament, this is applicable. That was our nation we weren't founded as a Christian nation, but we are a nation founded by Christians, right? And whether you go back to the Mayflower Compact in 1620 with the Puritans coming over, or the Pilgrims coming over, and you look at the spread of Christianity amongst the emerging colonies that would begin to be formed from 1620 all the way up until 1776, Christianity was the dominant form of belief system in the United States. Now, that concept, the marrying of those two together, the Judeo-Christian worldview and the Greco-Roman system of philosophy and law, is what Western civilization, what's made it flourish in ways that no other civilization ever has. And we can go back to the Magna Carta, we can go to the Reformation, we can go to the philosophies that were put into the Declaration of Independence. And the overarching one is that talking about individual liberty, national sovereignty, which I didn't include it in here, but you can go to the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, and the idea that limited government is better than big government, right? Because these guys, the founders, they'd all experienced imperial tyranny from Mad King George and going even to his predecessors, going all the way back through time. There was always kings and queens, or there was emperors, or there was czars, or there was pharaohs, on and on. All these systems were all totalitarian. All of them were. And it wasn't, you have to go back to the Greek city-states to get back to some type of a democracy, or to the Roman times where they governed themselves as a republic before the age of Caesars took over there in the late first century, or I guess of BC. I think it was like 43 BC when Julius Caesar took over. But you would have to go back, way back, to go find some other governments that ruled their people apart from or away from this idea of kings and queens and emperors. Most cultures throughout the world, even until this day, they're totalitarian in nature. There's either one person ruling that country, like we see in North Korea with Kim Jong-un, or even in China, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin in Russia, or you might have some type of an oligarchy where you have just a small select group of people running everything, and they hold all the power. And we've seen examples of this throughout history as well. But the point is that there have been things throughout time that have aided the development of Western civilization from a purely technological standpoint. I mean, the Gutenberg press was one of the most important inventions of all history, because it, as I put on my notes here, democratized knowledge. Once they were able to mass produce books, be able to put those out, and the first book that I believe that Gutenberg printed was the Bible. But it allowed the spreading of knowledge to a much wider audience, or a much wider population. So they were able to learn for themselves. They weren't complete, as time went on, they weren't as reliant upon, say, the Roman Catholic priest to read scripture to them. They could simply have a Bible in their own language and read it for themselves. Because when you have somebody reading something to you, they're interpreting that information through their lenses and through their biases. And obviously, this led to the crescendo we see in 1517 with the Reformation, where Martin Luther posts his 95 Thesis on the door there in Wurtemberg, talking about all of the things that the Roman Catholic Church needed to fix. And out of that whole thing came what we know now as the Protestant Reformation, and that's where the yoke of Roman Catholicism, salvation by works, was thrown off. And this is where the idea of the five solas came out of, the salvation by grace alone, faith alone, in Christ alone, Scripture alone, and glory to the God alone. And that removed the middlemen, which had been the Roman Catholic bureaucrats, all the way from the Pope all the way down to the cardinals, and all the global infrastructure they had already built up in between there. You didn't need to go through the church anymore. You didn't need to go through the priest or through the Pope to become saved or to find salvation. You could simply place your faith in Jesus Christ alone, and you wouldn't know that unless you were able to read that. So I mean, the Gutenberg press, again, one of the most pivotal inventions of all human history. Adding to that collective body of knowledge that was beginning to rapidly spread was the scientific revolution that took place, between 1543 and near the 1700s. And the thing about these guys, and I'm not saying that they're all born again Christians or they are 100%, biblical in the sense of how we understand the Bible, but they all seemingly started from a biblical starting point. Back in, I think it was Copernicus or Galileo, I can't remember which, the Roman Catholic Church, believed this idea that the world was flat. They believed that that the sun, revolved around the earth, and that the earth, that everything was kind of earth centric in terms of the solar system. And when, I don't know, you got to help me out on this one. Copernicus or Galileo discovered that the earth revolves around the sun. That was considered heretical, that was considered a conspiracy. And I think one of those two guys was thrown in jail over it from the Roman Catholic Church. And the idea that the earth was flat, I mean, we had the maps at that time, and you would go beyond Europe and beyond Asia, there was these two massive bodies of water, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And, they would just draw the edge. They would put the oceans there in the middle of the map, or the edge of the maps there. And then it just would say a little sign out there, here there be monsters, So out beyond, it was just unknown. And not necessarily that everyone at that time believed the earth was flat. It was a prevailing thought, because people just hadn't, traveled that far to find out for themselves whether it was or not. We have the age of discovery. This would be all of the European colonial powers that began to sail around the world once Christopher Columbus had gone over. And I will just say this: the Vikings had come over 500 years earlier. There is some evidence that the Chinese had made it over down into like Central America years or centuries before that, or somewhere in that time period. So it wasn't that other cultures hadn't traveled. We just didn't know about it. Their cultures were largely considered, at least the Vikings were considered barbarians, and they didn't keep written records of anything. And so a lot of their history was just lost. We only know about their travels here because they've left, relics behind in the form of ruined letters and some weapons and things like that, structures that they built. And it seems to be right around the time of the 10th century. Same thing with the Chinese. It seems that they would have traveled to the Americas sometime around that same period of time. There was some evidence that the Chinese had come over as well. Galileo, thank you, Christine. Mary says Galileo was forced to recant by Inquisition. Yeah, not fun. So the world was getting smaller at this point. Portugal, the Dutch, the British, the Spanish, the French all had fleets going out all over trying to create, feed the trade markets and things like that for spices and for material, for precious metals, for animals, for foods, all sorts of things. And so the British began to dominate here with the East India British Company, or the East India Company and the West India Company, I think, are the two British major trading companies that kind of dominated trade between Europe and Asia. And it was in also this time that, 1620, that the Pilgrims left Europe. They were seeking religious freedom, and they came over to what they knew was the New World, and established their colony there in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And we know that the Europeans had come over earlier to further south in the eastern seaboard to Roanoke and to a couple of places there, but the colonies didn't last. So the 1620 colony was the first successful settlement that we had out of Western Europe into America. And that was the start of basically what would become later the United States. We have the Age of Enlightenment. Guys like John Locke, Voltaire, Kant, Immanuel Kant, not necessarily Christians, but they were expanding the idea of personal liberties, and it just a shaking off of the old. And a lot of, if you look at like Voltaire's, a lot of his angst wasn't necessarily against the Bible in its true form, but it was against organized religion. It was against the Roman Catholic Church, and ultimately it tainted him. I believe he died as an atheist. We have the founding of the American founding and the American Revolution between 1776 and 1789. Obviously, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, all the names that we grew up learning about, their founding fathers. And what they did with the Declaration of Independence was revolutionary. And to my knowledge, it was the only document that up until that time that had established that man's liberty was not from human government, but rather that it was from God, our creator, because we are all created in his image. And so that was codified into our Declaration of Independence. And then we see that expressed in the the amendments that were added. I'm blanking on the term here. What are the bills? The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. That's what it is. That we have that guarantee our rights as U.S. citizens. Freedom of speech, the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, the not getting tried, the double jeopardy. You don't have to house soldiers in your house. There's all these things within the Bill of Rights that is codified into law that no other nations had those things. And right around the same time, you had the French Revolution going on. And guess what they did not do? They did not enshrine man's liberties to a creator, but rather they enshrined them to government. And how many times has the French government changed since that time, since the times of Napoleon, when he took over? So their revolution was incredibly bloody. It was violent. I think it's the Jacobins were the kind of the radicals of that day. And they were, you had a radical form of government took over. And what did they begin to do? They began to guillotine people, enemies of the state, as it were. We see a lot of that same type of rhetoric and that same type of actions today with our progressive left, because they've been so radicalized by the Democrat Party to think that the only solution now is violence. And this is coming from, people that, for all intents and purposes, say they hate guns and they want to do away with the Second Amendment. They want to ban all guns, etc. But these are the same people that are doing all the shootings and all the assassination attempts and all of every time, almost every single time. They're either Islamic or they are some type of progressive woke left that is going out there and doing these terrible things. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But then we have the industrial revolutions, because because our society was designed to promote capitalism rather than some type of state-controlled economy. It was a free market economy. This caused innovation to happen and people to find better ways to do things that in times past, you had to do it by hand, and it often took all day or took hours and hours, incredibly time consuming and exhausting work now could be done by machines. And we begin to harness the power of steam and water and even coal to create things like the modern rail system. And that, obviously helped with expansion from coast to coast in the United States. We had the second industrial revolution, the third industrial, and now we're into the fourth industrial revolution. We're at the beginning stages of the fourth. And each of these revolutions that happen, they can be somewhat disruptive in terms of societal norms and societal functions. Because if you think back to the term the Luddites are often associated with people that are anti-technology, and that term comes from those people that were arguing or protesting against the introduction of, I think it was like the loom, like these machines that could help make blankets and stuff faster than having to do it by hand. And that was going to put all these people out of business, right? And we've seen that in each time. You have the horse and buggy driver who would take people from place to place. And then as automobiles became more accessible, people didn't need the horse and buggy driver anymore. Even here recently, we can look at how email has transformed communication across the United States and has, done significant economic damage, as it were, to like the U.S. postal system. And the U.S. postal system, still delivers mail and things like that, but not anywhere near to where it was in the past. Mostly it's just like packages and things now, or what people do, they shop online and they're getting stuff delivered to their house. And then, we had, because of the Declaration of Independence, and that in there was the statement that all men are created equal. This idea that humans are unique in all of creation, in the sense that we're all created in the image of God. Now, at the time, and I'm not trying to make excuses for these guys, but at the time, I mean, their fight wasn't trying to necessarily end slavery everywhere. It was to establish themselves as a country. But we can see, going back to the early 1800s, and even Jefferson wrote about this in, I think, 1820, that the slavery would be the issue that divided the nation. And you can see from the early 1800s all the way up until the time of the actual start of the Civil War, there was all of these series of events that were happening that kept stoking the flames of trying to rid the New World of slavery. We saw that it happened in England before the United States, but there was still, even to this day, there's still slavery. Even in Africa, there's still slavery. You've got the Muslim North enslaving the sub-Saharan South in places like Sudan, and really all across that dividing line there, people are sold into slavery. And so throughout the Muslim world, at least, slavery is still thriving. But we applied the Western moral logic to dismantle the global institution of slavery. And so those are some of the things that have made Western civilization, in particular the United States of America, the envy of the world, in a place that everybody was desiring to come to. And we saw from the 1800s all the way up until, here recently, people flooding in from all over the world. Especially in the early 1900s, you see big bands of Irish coming over, big bands of Italians coming over, Spanish and Dutch and Germans, and everybody was coming over and making a new life in the new world. And it was an age of opportunity, and people that came over early on, they were proud to call themselves Americans. They didn't have to hyphenate their name like Italian American or African American or this American or that American. It was just, I was American. And the idea of America wasn't rooted into a skin color. It wasn't rooted into a particular culture. The culture was American, and it didn't matter where you came from. You came here, you became a citizen, and you began to contribute to this new American ideal. And that's, basically where we've kind of come from. And now I want to look at the same time that these good things are happening, there's also negative things that begin to happen and take root in society. I call this the destruction of the pillars of Western civilization. You had, obviously, slavery was a major dividing point. It resulted in the Civil War, America's deadliest and bloodiest war, where I think it was upwards of 400,000 Americans, or maybe 600,000 Americans, died fighting over this issue. And it wasn't just slavery, it was states' rights. It was, did the South have the right to maintain the kind of agrarian economy that they wanted? And if they did, they had to, they were heavily reliant upon slaves to do the work. And obviously, as technology got better and advanced, you didn't need a slave when you had a machine that picked cotton. You didn't need a slave if you had new devices that could help offset the labor, so that instead of needing a workforce of, say, 50 slaves to maintain a plantation, or 100 slaves, or whatever the case is, you had a couple of these machines, and now the machines did the work of all those people. So slavery was obviously the key dividing point of the 1800s. And you can look at the way the U.S. was before the Civil War and then after the Civil War. And really the introduction, or the final straw that broke the camel's back, was the election of Abraham Lincoln. He was up until Donald Trump came along, he was the most divisive president that the U.S. had at that time. He had, I mean, the mere thought of him being elected was enough to radicalize the South, the Southern Democrats, as it were, and Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. So we have the spread of Marxism across the pond in Europe, in Germany in particular. You have a guy named Karl Marx and Frederick Engels who moved to England, London, and they published their book, The Communist Manifesto, in 1848. And that began to spread like wildfire. And really, it created these classes of people and sought to exploit the classes to make one class feel inferior to the other class, or to make one feel superior to the other. And this was all kind of feeding off of the French Revolution and this idea of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, or how do you say it? Bourgeoisie, the elites. And if you remember back to Marie Antoinette, seemingly, at least according to history, she was this kind of aloof debutante, rich person, royalty. And when the people were starving or whatever, the supposed thing that she said was, let them eat cake. And so this was this idea, this exploiting the differences between the classes, the classes being the haves and the have-nots. Then we have Darwinian evolution. This was Charles Darwin's beginning publication there, The Origin of Species, in 1859. It created an alternative to the biblical Genesis account, and that instead of God creating Adam and Eve and putting them in the Garden of Eden and the Genesis 3 and everything following, there was this alternative put forth that mankind had been on the earth for millions of years, and we've been evolving from essentially pond scum all the way up through amphibians, and then to primates, and then from primates to cavemen, and then from cavemen to Cro-Magnon, all the way up to was it Homo erectus, or whatever the modern man is called. And this began to take root into the scientific communities as kind of their own version of Genesis, so that all the science going forward from that point was largely rooted in this idea of both uniformitarianism, that the earth had been around for millions and millions and millions of years, and that also in that time period that mankind was not created. We weren't unique. We were just another animal, the most highly evolved animal in a long series of other animals that we just kind of coexist with. So this gave birth to this idea called social Darwinism by Herbert Spencer. And again, it's like a sociological theory that emerged in the late 19th century. So when I say the late 19th century, I'm meaning the late 1800s, applying Darwin's biological concepts of survival of the fittest and natural selection now to humanity, which resulted in systemic racism. And we had just fought the war, right? We just fought the war to free the slaves. And now this new academically charged science, pseudoscience came forth and said that races were not all the same, that some races were superior to other races. And we obviously know this led to the rise of the Third Reich and the Holocaust and everything that's transpired through World War II. But before that, this idea was, relatively accepted in the United States and other places in the West. It seemed to make sense to them. And it also resulted in eugenics, like things like Planned Parenthood, where the idea was, Margaret Sanger was quoted in many places talking about the idea of getting rid of the dregs of society, the people born with Down syndrome. Planned Parenthoods were kind of planted all through poor neighborhoods and minority communities to kind of reduce the population of them. And I don't know how many people they've killed, but Planned Parenthood has killed way more people than the Third Reich and even Stalin and Mao together. You think about how many babies have been aborted since the early 1900s, systemically, government sanctioned, or at least tolerated. And it's been the United States. This is, in my opinion, this is the greatest tragedy of the United States, is this toleration of abortion. And you're looking at the deaths of over 100 million easily, babies that have been killed of all races, and all from all different kinds of parents. This is who knows what the world would have looked like had they allowed those children to be born. We could have solved cancer. We could have cured all these things, but we've, as a society, we've killed many different levels of generations of offspring that could have, we could have, well, obviously God knew all this ahead of time. This wasn't a surprise to God, but it is in my opinion, the bloody stain on the United States that we should be most ashamed of. Following in the same time period here, late 19th century, early 20th century, the rise of nihilism, guys like Friedrich Nietzsche, basically talking about, that there is no God. God is somebody that we created to appease the masses, and that science was going to be the solution for everything. And nihilism started strong, but it didn't last very long, because by the mid 20th century, people realized that science can do a lot, but it can't do everything. And there's a lot of things within this world, this physical reality, that we simply don't understand, and that can't be explained by science. We have Sigmund Freud and his psychoanalysis studies, basically providing justifications for all the different things that ail us. If you go out and murder a bunch of people, then it must be because your mother didn't love you enough, or your father beat you, or something. They're trying to apply some type of a psychological, and I know I'm simplifying this greatly, but when you boil it all down, it's just basically man has a reason for why he does anything bad, and usually it's somebody else's fault. It's the culture. People are inherently good, but they're constrained by their upbringing, or they're constrained by some of these other factors that cause them to do bad things. But the Bible says that the human heart is wicked, in that we're all fallen, that we're all sinful, and none of us seek after God's God's will. We all just go our own way. And were it not for the Holy Spirit, we would be in way worse shape today. As I don't even think we would have survived, a few centuries after, without the Holy Spirit operating in the way that he does now in this dispensation. Continuing on, scientism, late 19th, early 20th centuries, obviously US, UK, Europe. And I'm going back a bit to Bacon, Descartes, Hume, Comte, J.B. Mill, Carl, and obviously going forward now, Carl Sagan, Hawkins, and Musk, Peter Thiel, all these people today that believe that science is the solution, and that science has all the answers. And if we don't understand it yet, just wait a little bit, science will figure it out. And if you've seen movies recently, a lot of science fiction movies, what's the most recent one that's out now, with Ryan Gosling in it, where he's got to go figure out why the sun is dying. I'm blanking on this. Basically, all these science fiction movies going back to the 1940s, 50s, they always present their Hail Mary. Thank you, Richard. They present some type of existential crisis, and it's through science that they find the solution, right? So it's always science is the answer to everything. you got to math your way through whatever the issue is, or you know, scientifically figure out your way through something, and that man is capable. And that, believe it or not, is not that far off in a way, because if you go back to Genesis 11, and man there is building the Tower of Babel, and God comes down, and obviously God already knew from his vantage point there in heaven, he didn't need to come down, but he's doing this for our benefit. And one of the phrases that he says in there, one of the statements that God makes, is that because man is united in language and in purpose, there wasn't anything that they would be prevented from doing. In other words, they would be able to do anything if they all come together and put their minds together. There's not anything they can't do. And so what does God do? He separates mankind by language and scatters them over the face of the earth. And why does he do that? Well, because if mankind had continued on that particular trajectory, we would have died not soon after, or very soon after there. Mankind would not have survived had we remained united. And ultimately, you know, it was a violation of the Noahic covenant, where God had told them in Genesis 9 to go forth and to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And they didn't. Instead, they congregated there on the plains of Shinar and began to build this tower. They ultimately came under the control of a man named Nimrod, and, you know, the world's first type of dictator. And, you know, had mankind been left to their own devices, we probably would have died out there and not even made it, were it not for God's, you know, providential oversight of us in doing the things that he's done, not as punishment, but as a constraint against mankind's ambitions, as it were. Then we have the Frankfurt School, 1920s to 1960s, Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse. Sometimes it's called critical theory. You've heard of critical race theory. It all comes from the Frankfurt School here. They were originally founded in Frankfurt, Germany, but as the Third Reich began to rise and gain prominence and power, they fled Germany and came to Brown University in New York, and then spread to other universities as well. Basically, it begins to dismantle Western hegemony through social critique, and also introducing things like postmodernism and deconstruction, and basically that our history is bad. And in the Frankfurt School, these guys were communists, so they were complete devout Marxist. So they definitely were opposed to things like the Declaration of Independence. They were opposed to free market capitalism, things like that. They completely bought into this, I call it a religion, the religion of Marxism, in that there had to be class struggles. And so they begin to introduce this teachings in universities, and then they begin to spread to seminaries. And then as these students begin to graduate, they became teachers. They begin to teach their students, on and on. And now it's just kind of is spread everywhere throughout the United States at all different levels. And in the corporate world, which is highly ironic, as well as the academia and in the realms of science, and even in seminaries and churches, are begin to promote these type of communist ideals. Now, these things have all contributed to the downfall of Western civilization. All of them have. And there isn't anything good that's come out of these things. And even if I want to look at scientism and say, well, you know, look at all the things that science has improved our world today. Well, you know, you go back to the Age of Enlightenment, and you had guys like Isaac Newton, Copernicus, Galileo, so forth, who made massive and major discoveries. And really, you had from the 1500s until almost the 1800s, you had all these scientists that started out with a biblical understanding of the world and reality, and they made the greatest advances at that time. And fast forward after Darwin, you know, say 50 to 100 years after Darwin's Origin of Species, mankind now, these scientists now are starting out with a flawed foundation, because they're not starting out with Genesis. They're not starting out with the Genesis account. They're starting out with a presupposition that the earth is billions of years old or millions of years old, and the universe is billions of years old, and that humans are not unique, and that we're just, evolved animals, etc. Yet the reality of science does not support those conclusions, right? We didn't, it took until the 1950s when scientists discovered DNA to realize how complex humans are, and that we could not have evolved from primates. Not only that, but when you just look at the scientific method where you have to have observable and repeatable tests, there's nowhere in nature that we see species changing from one species to another. Now, you can have changes, you can have microevolution where you have changes within a species, like dogs. You could take a big dog and a small dog and breed them together, and then they would have like a medium dog, or you get the different kind of coats and furs and traits that you want. You can breed those kinds of things within a species, and there's a great unlimited variety within a species. Same with cats, same with fish, birds, etc. But you can't breed a fish with a cat or a bird with a dog and get some kind of a hybrid creature. That nature doesn't work like that. And the only way that we can do those things now is to do like science fiction type stuff, where you're starting to make chimeras and you're having to go down to the genetic level, and you could take certain things from certain animals and give them to other animals. So I think in Japan, it was either Japan or Korea, they created these pigs that glow in the dark, and they would take, I think it's from like jellyfish or some type of a fish that glows in the dark. They have this natural fluorescence about them because of the depths and the darkness that they live in. You could take those and begin to apply those at the genetic level to certain animals now, and begin to make these kind of hybrids. You can take a human DNA and grow like a human ear on the back of a pig, or I think it's just pigs right now because of their skin is very similar to ours, and so you can do those kinds of things. But in nature, they don't work at all. All right. So I wanted to talk about the breakdown of society and the potential for civil war, potential for collapse, etc. And we come up with this term of factionalism. And a lot of these notes here I got from Dr. David Betts talking about what's going on currently in Europe, and we'll talk about Europe here in a second. But factionalism is a condition where a larger group, or the nation, tribe, etc., divides into smaller competing subgroups, and then the subgroups prioritize their own interest, often in contradiction to the interest of the larger group. So, obviously within the United States, you start having all of these hyphenated groups: Mexican American, African American, Asian American, on and on and on. And then we see that critical race theory plays into this. So coming out of the Frankfurt School, they begin to not necessarily pit economic classes against each other like Marx had done in the early 19th century, even going back to like the French Revolution. It wasn't one social class against another, but they begin to subdivide that into racial groups, which obviously things like social Darwinism greatly help to fuel the flame, the fan the flames there, to help those very toxic ideas to spread. So the Frankfurt School takes this idea and begins to apply it not just the rich versus the poor, the haves and the have-nots, but also against blacks versus whites, straights versus gays, males versus females. Anywhere that they could create a division between groups based off of differences, they did. And then they begin to prioritize those. And we've seen those here. I mean, it's come back in full bloom here recently. I would say even prior to 2024, you had this whole hierarchy of victimhood where the most oppressed group, or perceived oppressed group, was at the very top of that pyramid. And I don't know what that is. Off the top of my head, I would have to imagine it was some type of maybe like a paraplegic Native American transsexual who grew up in North Korea or something. I don't know, but you would take the all of those traits, the worst parts of the victimhood, and you would like glorify those things and amplify those things, and now those are the ones that get priority over everything else. And so we start to see this factionalism happen here in the United States like this. In Europe, it's much I don't want to say simpler. You basically have the non-natives immigrating in mass from either North Africa or the Middle East and coming into their communities, beginning to dominate, and then they take over, and then they want to change all the rules and the laws, and they don't want to assimilate into the culture they're moving into, and they just kind of import the culture from where they came from, which is primarily a failed state, bring that with them over to a state that's not failed state, and then try and replicate those same things. And what happens is you get a failed state. So these are the subgroups that we're seeing. The spectrum of factionalism. So it goes through these kind of cycles here, or not cycle, these stages. So stage one, you have normal politics. It's a starting point where the legitimacy of the system is not questioned. Then you get into the era of contentious politics, where there's a constant state of disagreement. And you have groups that begin to rise up that begin to action that. You have issue factionalism. So subgroups form around specific discrete issues, whether you're talking about slavery, abortion, the death penalty, immigration, Palestine, on and on and on. You could think of different groups or different issues that people kind of center around and make that the number one issue that they're going to die. That's the hill they're going to die on. No kings. You know, we've had one, two, three. Well, we've had two that have died thus far in Minneapolis because they so fervently believed and were so fervently against Trump and the ICE raids and removing illegal immigrants or illegal criminal immigrants. That they were willing to sacrifice themselves and get themselves killed for some cause, right? This guy the other night at the Correspondence Dinner in DC, I don't know how old he is. I think he was probably late 20s, early 30s. That guy just threw his whole life away. He's going to have multiple life sentences. He's never going to experience any kind of normal life anymore because he believes so fervently that Trump and his whole administration had to be killed. Again, the left, progressivism, wokeism, Marxism, communism, all the different isms, they're not rooted in logic and reason. They're rooted in emotions and subjectivism. And you can't reason with those kinds of people. And I'm not saying that that all Democrats are like that today. But there seems to be a growing majority of them. Now you have things like polar factionalism. Competition shifts from specific issues entrenched in symbolic identity cleavages. So there's a sharpening or hardening of the edge, as it were. So you're not just Republican, now you're MAGA. You're going to identify yourself as kind of the ultimate form of Republican. You're not just Democrat anymore. You're a Democrat socialist, or you're a Democrat, you're pro-Islamic, or you're environmentalist, or you're some other kind of faction within the Democrat Party. And then next we see the militancy stage. So you have the sustained polar factionalism leads to, again, a hardening, a sharpening, increased social breakdown characterized by organized coercive action. We see that with Antifa, Proud Boys, Greenpeace, ELF, the Free Palestine movement, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, et cetera. And these are people that will go out and do violence, and they will go out and riot, and they will go out and protest, fully armed and to intimidate, or to, they're not content with just, voting, trying to make change by their ballots, and now they're turning to the bullet. And we're at that stage now where we are very well entrenched into the militancy stage, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, in England. You're starting to see this militancy rising up, and that's really the last stage prior to civil war. And if the government fails to restore any kind of legitimate monopoly, this is where violence is gonna break out widespread. Now, it's not going to just be it's not going to just be, when we talk about civil war, it's not going to be like it was in the 1800s, where we had these uniformed armies that were basically fighting under gentleman rules, where one side of the field would line up with these guys in the blue outfits, and these guys in the gray outfits would line up on the other side, and then they would take turns killing each other, shooting each other, right? No, it's going to become much more what we call the Balkanization or Balkanized fighting. And if you think back to Serbia and Montenegro and that in the 1990s, you had factions within these little sections here, and everybody was fighting everybody, and this group was against this group. And you did, even in Ukraine in the 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, nobody was wearing uniforms. You couldn't tell who the Russian, if you were American or you're from the West, you didn't know who the difference between a Ukrainian and a Russian was, or and a Russian. The language sounds very similar. They look the same. They weren't wearing uniforms. You couldn't tell who was who. It was very, very confusing at the time. Same thing in Serbia in the 1990s. And so they just call this the Balkanization, where you had a state that was put together by the communists, and after the Iron Curtain, you had a state like Yugoslavia that was this communist dictatorship that held everything together. And once that dictatorship was gone, everything kind of broke apart, and everybody kind of went back to their tribes, where they same religion, same culture, families, etc. And they began to look back and reflect back on all the injustices that were done from this group. Killed my great grandparents, back in the 1920s, and now I'm going to go back and I'm going to kill their grandparents and for payback, and then that just never ends, right? It just keeps going and going. So that's the factionalization. Ultimately begins with normal politics, and then it ends in civil war. And again, not clean, North versus South. This is, if it were happening in the United States, the movie that the Obamas helped, I don't know if they funded it or helped put it together or whatever, but that movie on Netflix, what was it called? The Things We Leave Behind? No. No, I'm sorry. There was a second Civil War movie that came out, like American Civil War. It wasn't the one the Obamas did. This came out, I think a year or so after that. And, you drive from one state or county to another, and you've got a different group in power. And it's just the leave the world behind. Thank you. So I think that if the Lord doesn't return in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or even less than, maybe 3-4 years, you're going to see some type of a civil war event happen in the United States. Now, I think Europe is much further along than we are, and they're much more dire situation than we are, because our system, and I'll make this caveat, that our system has been the most stable government the world's ever seen. We're coming up now on our 250th anniversary of the nation, the founding of the nation. There's not a country in Europe right now that isn't still a monarchy that has maintained the same kind of government for 250 years straight. I mean, the French have changed governments many, many times. The British, they were under the monarchy up until really, I guess, World War I. And then the power began to shift to the prime ministers and to Downing Street and the government there, Parliament. But the breakup of the colonial world, if we go back to the time of expansion where you had Christopher Columbus, Magellan, etc., that all spawned these European colonies all over the world. But by the mid 20th century, after World War II, all those colonies wanted their freedom. And so now you have this new introduction of a flood of new nations that have only had their freedom very recently, within the last 100 years. Most of the Middle East did not exist until the 1920s because the Ottoman Empire controlled most of the Middle East. And once the Ottoman Empire collapsed at the end of World War I, the European powers came in and began dividing up all the different countries into their own little nation states, Transjordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, etc. So let me go to the next slide. So what changed utopia into dystopia? We have demographic collapse. So going back to the eugenics time period and social Darwinism was this idea that now childbirth was an option. You didn't have to have a child. The industrialization also, opened up opportunities for women to work or go into the workforce, particularly from World War II onward. You had the increase in leisure time, the increase or the reduction in work, the physical labor. If you had a farm, a small farm, farmstead, and let's say you grew some type of crops or whatever, you wanted to have a lot of kids because that helped spread the workload out. But now with the machinery, you might have sold your farm to somebody else that had a bigger farm, and now they've joined those farms together because they have machines that can do all that work. Or you moved into the city to take a job because people weren't buying turnips or potatoes or whatever you were growing. It wasn't enough to support the family because of inflation and because of other monetary things going on with the financial system. The banks coming in and repossessing a farm that had been in your family because you owed some back taxes or whatever. So there was a lot of different reasons why people moved to the cities. But as they moved to the cities, obviously you did not need as many children. So that began to decrease the size of the nuclear family from, say, 5 or 6 children for the normal family. Now it's down to 2. Multiply that across millions of different families across the United States, and you can start to see the population decline. And then if you add in things like World War I for Europe in particular, the British lost a whole generation of men that fought and died in World War I. And then in World War II, same thing. Same with the Germans, same with every other nation that had fought in World War I and II, lost significant amount of young men and women in those particular battles and those particular wars. So now you have a decline in population across most of Western civilization. And at the end of World War II, you had this thing called the liberals' rules-based order, that the world was going to operate very differently before or after World War II as compared to before World War II. And you had a lot of need for workers to come in to do the work because you didn't have the native populations to do those same things. And you didn't have enough people having children to replenish the workforce. So in the industrialized West, we have a demographic collapse. We have social fragmentation. Again, this goes back to this factionalization within societies, especially as they begin to flourish economically, and there's more downtime. People have more free time on their hands. What was the, what's that saying that idle time is the devil's playground or something like that? And so you had people having a lot more free time to think about things and to think about the way the world is and to read books and to get influenced by a growing cacophony of ideas, from everything from Darwinism to Marxism to all the different flavors of socialism to scientism, secularism. All of that stuff began to really make its way to more and more people with the advent of radio, with the advent of television. All of that began to proliferate the amount of information that was accessible to the average person. And now they're getting influenced by more and more and more things. And if we look at today, I mean, you can't go anywhere or go on anything without there being advertisements, without there being commercials, without there being somebody's pitching something to you. And so it's increasingly difficult to escape that being influenced. And especially today with smartphones and iPads and all the other types of trappings, technological trappings that we have accessible to us now, it's no wonder that we're such a mess that we are. You have loss of purpose and roles. Again, going back to the horse and buggy driver, you know, his job now is replaced by automobiles, but then new jobs open up within automobile factories. So now somebody that lived in the country now has to move to the city, and they don't need as many kids because their kids are not able to work in the factories until they reach a certain age. And now, you know, we've got one provider, we've got the mom staying home with the kids, and then that job goes out of business. That town goes under. The factory is sold, or we outsource that particular manufacturing capability to China or to India or Taiwan or whoever, and it's just being done somewhere else. And now that town closes down. And you can look all across the United States, particularly in the Rust Belt, where you have whole cities that are just basically vacant, you know, and defunct because of the changing economic tides that are moving jobs from the United States and being outsourced to other parts of the world for a fraction of the price. And that is one of the sins of, say, free market capitalism, where the dollar is king. And if you can save, you know, $5-10 on a widget, whatever that widget is, and let's say that the widget costs $50, and now you're saving $15, that's $15 more that you can go into your pockets, into your shareholders, right? So of course you're going to, you know, let China make it for, you know, 15 cents on the dollar. They don't have to worry about unions. You don't have to worry about healthcare. You know, you're basically just paying this third world country to make your goods and then ship it back over to you for a fraction of the cost. And then you take and sell that to the public, the American public, right? That allowed for the rise of things like Walmart and Kmart and Target and all these big box stores that, you know, I would venture to say, if you were to go into Walmart and look at the overwhelming or look at the number one country that produced 99% of the stuff in that store that's not food, you would see it was made in China. And, you know, this has greatly enabled China to build up their military to become a near peer threat to us here in the 2020s. And I'm sure that when they thought about this, or when Clinton did this back in the 1990s by making China the most favored nation status, or giving them the most favored nation status for trade, did he know that this was going to go purely into building their military? I'm sure people at the time thought that if we introduced free market capitalism to the Chinese, the communists, that the amount of money coming in and the rising middle class would cause them to abandon communism. That was kind of a prevailing thought at the time. And it hasn't. It's just made the communist oligarchs richer and given them more money to throw into their military, or throw into nuclear weapons, or throw into building a Navy or Air Force. And then next thing you know, they're competing with us on the world stage with 4th or 5th generation fighter jets that they've stolen the technology from us and reverse engineered it. And now it's made it far more dangerous for us to be here, because we basically funded them to build this massive army to fight against us. So we've been giving them money to do this. Aside from that, the loss of purpose, especially with regard to the advancements in technology, it's only going to get worse. And especially with artificial intelligence, you could go back to the 1980s when they began to introduce robotics into car factories. Instead of having a workforce of, say, and I'm just using a generic number here, like 200 people to work in a factory. Now, when you have these machines in there, you only need 50 people, or maybe not even that many. And basically, you're just there to make sure the machines don't mess up, and if they do, you can fix the machines, right? And so that's just removed 150 people from that source of income. How they pay their bills, how they feed their families, how they put a roof over their head or clothes on their body. All that's gone. They have to find some new thing, and they've lost that. Let's say they worked there for 20, 30 years, and that's all they knew. Now they got to start over because technology keeps advancing so rapidly. We thought that, the white collar jobs, lawyers and doctors and researchers, and we thought that those jobs would be safe because artificial intelligence would never get to the level of human intelligence. And even guys like Ray Kurzweil thought that, the singularity would happen, closer to 2050. Originally he said 2049, 2050 timeframe. And obviously he's had to come back and revise that because now, we're looking at, we've got Jensen Huang, who runs NVIDIA, saying that they've already achieved levels of artificial general intelligence, which, when you look at everything online, it's still being presented as theoretical, but it's not theoretical. It's already there. And, you could just simply look at how fast AI has happened here in the last couple of years, where you had it as a novelty back in, say, 2022, 2023, in narrow AI. Now it is, we're getting into agentic AI. So you have these agents now that you can program to just work while you're not even there. Think Jarvis, from Iron Man, being an artificial intelligence agent that just does whatever you tell it to do. Now, clearly in that movie, Jarvis would be ASI, artificial superintelligence, or some variation thereof. And I don't know if he's ever defined it that way or defined in that way, but we're getting to the point now where I think AGI will hit AGI before, 2028, maybe before that. So it's coming. And when it does come, it's going to start replacing huge swaths of our population from the workforce. Any job that you have that is tethered to a computer and you're having to research, you're having to do things, bookkeeping, taxes, medical billing, on and on and on. Anything that involves you sitting in front of a computer doing stuff, and AI can do it. You can probably already do it now. Think about how many people that job, that's going to wipe out huge segments of society, because most of everybody's jobs today involves computers to some degree. And that leaves the blue collar jobs. Well, they've got robots now, and we've looked at these in the past. You guys have seen them all over the place. Everything from bipedal to quadrupedal to insectoid to things that robots that go underwater, robots that can fly, robots that can climb. There's so many different kinds of robots now. All you have to do is embed that AI into that robot, and now it's going to be able to function at the level of a human in whatever design it's in to do whatever the task it's designed to do. And so blue collar jobs are going to be, slowly being eroded and taken away. And we don't know exactly when the Lord's going to return. We're hoping it's this year. I'm hopeful that it is. But let's just say that it's still a few years off. I would tell young people, don't even go to college. I told my kids that don't go to college. Learn a skill. Be a plumber. Learn how to do air conditioning or be an electrician or something that is still in the realm of humans, because the robotic side of it's still lagging. It's still further behind than where AI is just racing ahead. Same with quantum. Quantum is racing ahead. But as these people begin to lose their jobs, this is one of those issues that has come up amongst the technocratic elite. What do you do with all these people when they don't have jobs to go to anymore? Because now AI does it all, or robots do it all. And they came up with this idea of a universal basic income where everybody just gets paid for existing. And as Yuval Noah Harari would call us, useless eaters. What do you do with all these people? Well, think back to the mice, right? If you begin to lose your purpose and your role in that functioning society, whether it's of mice or men, you lose your purpose, you lose your role, you lose your purpose for living, really, and you become violent, and you just drift. You're not tethered to anything anymore. There's no need for you to reproduce, to pass on your genetics to the next generation, because you don't even know what you're doing. And you can see that same kind of process is beginning to happen now with humans that they did on this study with mice back in 1968. So I would venture to say that AI is going to be the greatest disruptor of our time, that is going to really fundamentally change everything. And people are no longer going to have 9-to-5 jobs that they go to because AI does it. And so what are they going to do? They've got to still eat. They've still got to live. And this is a huge problem that the government's got to solve, because if you have a bunch of people that are not working, have all the free time in the world on their hands, and are increasingly growing desperate, that nation's going to be in for a world of hurt, because those people are going to start rising up and becoming destabilizers to that particular society. So the idea of universal basic income sounds great in theory, but when you give people money and they didn't earn it and they didn't do anything to work for it, obviously they're just going to abuse it, and it's going to be very detrimental to a society. Last one here, normalcy bias. So while all these other things are happening, you still have people that are acting like the world is just going on like it always has. And everybody lives in their little bubbles. Everybody's, got their thing, their phone in front of their face, 24/7. People are glued to TVs, they're glued to movies, they're glued to sports, the stock market, whatever it is that they're looking at and devoting their time to. People just kind of think that the world's going to kind of continue on the way it always has. And, the world wasn't destroyed yesterday and it wasn't destroyed today. Well, tomorrow's probably not going to be destroyed either. So there's this idea of normalcy bias. It's the same mentality that we see in the Titanic. When they boarded the Titanic, I think it was in 1912. They thought the ship was impervious; it would never sink. I forget who said that. Some famous person said that quote. A God, or somebody said something like, "God couldn't even sink the Titanic," or something to that effect. And even when the disaster was out, or when the crisis was right in front of them, and there was this iceberg, and they're approaching it too fast, there was still everybody on board. Nobody had any idea what was going on. They were just eating, drinking, dancing, sleeping, going on about their normal lives outside this boat until they hit the iceberg, right? And then, so there's this idea, blanking on the guy's name. Let me look him up real quick. So from the book The Sun Also Rises from Ernest Hemingway, it's his 1926 novel, he asked one character asked the other one, he said, how did you go bankrupt? And the guy said, well, gradually, then suddenly. So things happen gradually, change is slow. And it was this idea that because it hasn't happened yet, it won't happen. That's a very dangerous mindset to embrace, And same thing with the people that lived near Pompeii, the volcano back in 70 AD, or I think it was 79 AD, I think was when it erupted. You live next to a volcano. You got people living in Hawaii now that, basically that's a whole volcano chain. You got people living near Mount St. Helens and the three, I think it's called the Three Sisters, and other places that are supposedly extinct volcanoes. I think Mexico City is built inside of a volcano. All that to say is that we kind of live with this idea that because the world didn't end yesterday, it didn't end today, that it's not going to end tomorrow. That mindset is prevalent across everywhere, right? And I think the only people that are not subscribing to that idea is the watching community of people like us that are watching and waiting for Christ to return, because we know that the rapture isn't based on it's not based on a feast date. It's not based on, some type of astronomical sign in the skies. It's not based on, any type of geopolitical issue going on in the world. The rapture can literally happen at any time. It's imminent to us in the sense that we don't know when it's going to happen, but it's not imminent to God. God knows exactly when it's going to happen, and I think He's got a date assigned to it. And that date was known from before the foundation of the world. And so we live with this expectation that it could be today. And I think that's one of the key attributes that Christ really wanted to impress upon us as His followers and disciples, that, He kept going on and on about, the parables, talking about the rich king goes away and he comes back at an unexpected time. Or the ruler goes away, comes back at some time after some time has passed. He comes back and he finds his servants, beating each other and doing all kinds of stuff. And so there's always kind of this implied the vineyard owner or the king or the ruler is there. He gives his people instructions and he goes away for a period of time, and then he comes back. Right? It's never that he just goes away and never comes back at all. He's definitely coming back. And those are those parables that Jesus was trying to instill those lessons to the audience of His day, as well as to us, by extension to us. And then you have the actual direct comments from Christ, Matthew 16, 1-4, talking to the Pharisees, telling them that you can look at the sky and you can tell whether it's going to rain or storm or whatever, or it's going to be fair skies. And He goes, you can't even understand the signs of the times. I'm here in your midst right now, and you couldn't even recognize that, even though the Old Testament had a bunch of signs and a bunch of things that would foretell His coming. Whether you're talking about Daniel 70 weeks, you're talking about Micah 5:2, all the 108 different prophecies concerning Christ's first coming. There was an expectation that the Jews there in the first century should have known that He was the Christ. He was the Messiah. Luke 19:44, Jesus was weeping. This is right after He rides up through Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. He weeps over the city, saying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you'd only known that this was your day, you should have recognized who I am, but you didn't. And because you didn't, your city's going to be taken from you. Your children are going to be killed. Your women ravaged. Your men are going to be killed. Your city destroyed. And that's what happened. It happened in 70 AD, just like that. So there is an expectation that we're not going to know the day or the hour, but we should recognize the season. And we should also recognize the reality that we're the only generation that has the technological criteria in Revelation 11 and Revelation 13. No other generations had that. No other generation has had the ability to see two bodies laying in the streets from all over the world. Like today, if something happened in Jerusalem, a famous leader was killed or whatever and assassinated, we could watch that live. If it was being filmed, the whole event was being filmed, we could watch it live. Right? That never could happen in any previous generation. Not even in our parents' generation. Before, I think it was the late 1980s when we started having satellite television. I think it was CNN was the first to be able to stream from somewhere around the world. And so really that limits this generation from 1989 or 1988 forward as being able to have that technological capability that we see expressed in Revelation 11. Now, we also, here in 2026, we live in a time where, for the first time in human history, there is the potential for a digital currency that can be used anywhere by anyone. You know, before digital currencies, every nation had its own currency. And some places took your currency and some places didn't take your currency. But for certain, you could not control all buying and selling. You know, even if it were the United States, like the United States, we made the US dollar the global reserve currency. And if you wanted to buy oil from OPEC, you had to have US dollars. So it required you to have US dollars in your bank to be able to use as a functional currency or a functional international currency. And, you know, that was fine. But, you know, the president of the United States, you know, whether it was, you know, let's just say it was Reagan couldn't control all buying and selling in the world, even though the dollar was the US global reserve currency. He couldn't control somebody in Japan buying a car, paying in yen, or somebody in Russia paying in rubles, or, you know, there was no way to control any of that. But with a digital currency and the collapsing of our present fiat currencies, and you know, another thing here is you have how many nations in the world today are just drowning in debt. Most of the industrialized nations are drowning in debt. I mean, up to their eyeballs in debt. You know, we're over our head in debt. Like, I mean, it's like way above us, orders of magnitude above us. We're just sinking to the bottom. So we know that the global reserve currency, the US dollar, is not sustainable. And you've had other nations since the early 2000s recognize this is also a potential threat to their own economy. So what did they do? They formed BRICS. They wanted to come up with a basket of currencies that were based on commodities like oil or gold or silver. And this is largely what is driving Trump's policies now with regard to Fortress America, this idea of making or keeping America relevant for the next 100 years. And in order to do that, he has to control the rare earth minerals. And well, he's going to do that because he wants to control the AI stack. So you have the artificial intelligence hardware, the software, the data centers, and the actual artificial intelligence itself, whichever one ends up, you know, winning the whole enchilada, because AI is very, very different from the AI arms race we're in right now is very different from the nuclear arms race we were in during the Cold War. In the Cold War, we had MAD to help govern global peace. You know, this idea of mutually assured destruction. If Russia launched a nuke at us, we'd launch 10 at them, and it was a no-win scenario. Both sides would lose. So therefore, it was a restraint on ourselves, really, to prevent global annihilation by launching a thermonuclear war. Well, instead of launching nuclear wars at us, we got really good at fighting proxy wars, and so did the Soviets. So did the Iranians, and so did, you know, everybody else. You know, anybody that had a nuclear weapon basically became untouchable. But they also waged war in other ways: economic warfare, political warfare, you know, financial, or, you know, economic. Anyways, we found other ways to fight each other rather than go head to head, because we knew that would ultimately result in a nuclear conflict. So we mostly limited ourselves to fighting third world nations who did not have nuclear weapons, whether it was, you know, Korea or Vietnam, Iraq, in the Gulf War. Obviously, we fought back there in the World War on Terror. We fought the insurgents in Iraq as well as in Afghanistan, and then we had this global war on terror, et cetera, et cetera. But everybody we fought, none of those groups had nuclear weapons. The only group that was close to getting a nuclear weapon that was as crazy is the Iranians, who now we're in a conflict with now to prevent them from ever getting that. And all that to say that, we live in this time where I think Tyler called it, we live in a very, very violent and wicked age, but it's normal for us because this is all we've ever known, right? And it just seems like this is the way the world is and the way the world's always going to be. It's always going to be this kind of corrupt. And that's going back to this idea of normalcy bias. Everybody just thinks that the way things are today, they're just going to be like that for the next 50 years. And eventually, some things will change. It'll be slow, but they don't realize the exponential nature of how fast things are changing. I know Britt Gillette has talked a lot about exponential change. You guys should be fairly familiar with this idea that this change is going to happen very, very gradually, and then it's going to start to turn up, and then next thing you know, it's shooting straight up. And that's AI is doing that right now. Quantum technology is doing that right now. So the world, even if the Lord doesn't come back, the point on all this is to say that the world is changing very, very rapidly, and it's changing in a very negative way for mankind. And if the Lord doesn't come back within the next few years, it is going to be very tough times going forward. We see this captured here in the Bible in Luke 17, Jesus talking about, and as it was in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it also was in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so, it will be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Now, I liken this to a pre-tribulation passage because we know that inside of the 70th week, it's going to be anything but normal. Yes, there will be people eating and drinking still. There will be people that are marrying and planting and sowing, etc. But you're going to have a 7-year time period that is the most compressed and the most intense 7 years that human history has ever seen. Not only that, but you're going to, put on top of that 28, or if we count the thunder judgments, 28 divine judgments that will be hitting and racking the earth and shaking the earth. And you're going to see half the world's population die even before somewhere around the midpoint of that 7 years. So 3.5 years in, half the population is going to be dead. So it's going to be anything but normal. So I liken this to a pre-tribulation passage. And we know that both Noah and Lot were delivered prior to the judgment. They weren't delivered halfway through the judgment or 3/4 of the way through the judgment. No, they were delivered prior to the judgment. And their delivery, even though it wasn't off the earth per se, it was commiserate to the level of judgment that was happening. Obviously, God wasn't going to rapture Noah and his family because he still needed them to repopulate the earth, after the flood was going to be done. Lot, that destruction there wasn't global. It was simply limited to the plains there where Sodom and Gomorrah sat. And that divine judgment was so intense that we don't even have any, there's no any archaeological remains of those places anymore. That's how thorough it was. Yet, Lot was delivered prior to the judgment. Lot was not, at least in the Old Testament story, we don't think of him as righteous, right? We don't think of it. There's nothing in his narrative there in Genesis that would lead us to believe that if that's all we had, we would just think, okay, here's a very deeply flawed guy that was living in a bad place and got caught up in bad circumstances and made bad decisions, and God still delivered him. But when you read Peter in 1 Peter, I think it's in 1 Peter, Lot is called righteous. Righteous Lot was vexed. his soul was vexed living in this wicked place. So I liken that to kind of living in a place like, if you're a Christian working and living in a place like, say, San Francisco or Los Angeles or Austin, Texas, or even Dallas and some of these other major cities where you just see wickedness and people's lives, just, the homeless people, the people on fentanyl, the people on all these drugs you see just kind of laying around and just wasting their lives away. It vexes you to see that. It vexes you to see people protesting on every single issue, on everything, and destroying the city or rioting or protesting or stealing. It's vexing to live in that kind of place. And that's why so many people have left California. So many people are moving away from these big cities and getting out of them because of how dangerous they become. Because progressivism, leftism, wokeism, it just feeds this virus that is destroying these cities. Now, for believers, for us, yes, we're living in increasingly darkening times. However, there is a promise of deliverance for us, because we read here in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, where he writes, "But concerning the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren," now he's changing back to the collective of us, the believers and the watchers. "We are not subject to this," right? And he had just spent the previous chapter describing in detail the rapture of the church, the harpazo in the Greek, or in the English, we have catching up. The church is going to be delivered. We see that reiterated by Jesus himself in John 14, 1-3. Jesus also reiterates that in Revelation 3:10, where he's promising to take the church and remove the church from the earth prior to the hour of testing that's coming upon the whole world. Well, if the testing is coming upon the whole world, the only place to deliver them from all the global testing is off the world, and that's via the rapture. And so we see that in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul again is explaining this and framing it a little bit differently, considering the context of the chapter. And then other passages, many other passages, Titus 2:13, Philippians 3:20-21, and others that talk about our deliverance, the church's deliverance prior to this terrible, terrible time that's coming upon the earth. So with all that said, that's all I have for my discussion tonight in terms of the subject, the collapsing of this utopia that we live in. And it really is a utopia. It's not paradise, but it's as close to utopia as the world's ever seen yet, right? We know that the ultimate utopia is coming, and that will be with Christ returning at the second coming and establishing his kingdom, which will be like that rock that struck the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The rock that took out the statue then began to fill the whole earth. The whole earth is going to be subject to Christ. He's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem, Israel, as the rightful king and King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So before we go into Q&A, I just wanted to drop these in here real quick. This is the upcoming Mississippi Conference this Saturday in Flowood, Mississippi. So if you're in the area, we still welcome you to come. I think it's my thing is hiding it there, but it says $45 and that includes a lunch with you there. So if you're in the area, we welcome you to come. Just go to prophecy.ms and you'll have all the details there for this. And then at the end of May, I'll be speaking up here at Tom Hughes's Hope for Our Times at the 412 Church in Idaho, or Boise, Idaho. So again, if you're up in this area, if you live anywhere near Boise, welcome you to come and come listen to the list of speakers there. Tom Hughes, Brandon Holthouse, Billy Crone, Ricky Scaparo, and then myself as the late addition to this. But we'll be there. We'll be able to hang out, meet and greet, take pictures, etc. So Look forward to seeing you at either in Mississippi or in Idaho. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the questions that my moderators have so graciously collected up for me. Thank you, guys. Let's see. Oh man, I just talked for 2 hours. I thought I would be done in an hour and a half. Okay. This is today, 4/27, from Donna C3377. In Joshua 7, Achan sins and his entire family and animals are killed for it. Why? In both Deuteronomy 24:16 and Ezekiel 18:20, in summary says you are punished for your own sins, the animals too. I'm not familiar with the story off the top of my head. I am familiar with it, but I don't have the specifics on it. And I don't even have my Bible in front of me. So I owe you on this one. I will have to come back to you next week and answer this question. So mods, just save this question for me, because I don't want to just spitball it. I honestly am not familiar with it off the top of my head. Look up 1991 question. Who is they in Revelation 24? Revelation 24. And believe it or not, I do not have the Bible memorized. I have a lot of parts of the Bible that I'm very familiar with, and I have in my head. But there's still a lot that I don't have memorized or committed to memory. This is Revelation 24. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and not received the mark on their forehead or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So this is talking about the tribulation saints, so the people that come to faith after the rapture of the church. And I think that the rapture itself will be a maybe the most powerful evangelical events that have ever happened. It's going to show the whole world. And, think about it. Why have we been allowed to talk about the rapture so openly for the last 30, 40 years, especially with the advent of social media and the internet and everything like that? More people know about the rapture than they probably in the previous 100 years prior to that, in terms of just the general population. So I think that God is using us, using me, using other folks right now across all different kinds of ministries to awaken the public to the idea that the rapture is coming and it's going to happen, and it's going to radically transform the world. It's going to remove all the believers off the earth at one time. And I think also the children under the age of accountability, and those with Down syndromes, and those that are not capable of making decisions of their own accord. And that is going to leave the world reeling in shock. But I do think that there's going to be enough people that are going to see the rapture happening, that they're going to know with their own eyes and see with their own eyes that this was that thing that those crazy Christians were talking about all those years before. The Left Behind books, that Left Behind movies, and the rapture kits, and all the stuff that we were leaving out for everybody and talking about with our neighbors and our coworkers. And we're putting it out there online. We're putting it out there in books. We're putting it out there in images and memes and things like that. Now, I mean, any way that it can go out, we're trying to get it out there. So I do think that the rapture itself will be one of the most powerful evangelical tools that God's going to use, and that's why He uses the rapture. We read in Revelation 7 that those numbers of people that come to faith after Christ that are martyred, their numbers are so great that they can't even count them. And then in the next chapter, you see that there's a demonic army that's 200 million. And then John's like, I heard that number, 200 million. So to me, it seems like it's some number far greater than 200 million. So it's those people. Those are the ones that are the ones that were beheaded for Christ in the tribulation, or were martyred for Christ in the tribulation, will rule and reign with him as well as the church. And the church is going to have its own special place in God's millennial kingdom. We'll be in our glorified forms. I'm assuming that the tribulation saints will also be in their glorified forms at that point. It doesn't specify that, but we know that under the altar, when they're there under the altar, they're obviously in their spirit bodies at the very least. So they will come back in some type of glorified body or form that will be distinguishable from the church. From Vanderbucks, besides the rapture, I'm assuming you meant, will there be an event that you predict that will totally change the world in a day? Example, nuclear war. Well, in one of my presentations for Mississippi, it's the 10 predictions I had for 2026. And I'm not ruling out the idea that a nuclear exchange can't happen this year. I think there's two really good potential reasons why one does happen. And I know Trump hates nuclear bombs, like he hates them. He never wants to use them, etc. I tend to think, though, that if we are not able to come to some kind of arrangement with the IRGC to get out the enriched uranium from Pickaxe Mountain or Isfahan or wherever the enriched uranium is stored at, we're not going to put in ground troops to go march in there and get them without a 100% guarantee and a pacification of the IRGC that those soldiers aren't going to be ambushed and trapped and killed. And we don't have enough ground forces to put in there. Well, let me take that back. We don't have the armored equipment that we need to be able to do something like that, to secure a site in order to go in there and extract all this uranium. You could have a low yield massive ordnance bomb, these GPUs that are designed to detonate underground. Well, they have some that are nuclear tipped, and they're like a low yield nuclear tip ground penetrators. And if you had a nuclear bomb detonate underneath the surface of the earth, I mean, it would liquefy everything underneath that, and really just if you go back to like the 1950s, you can go back and watch. I think they have some of this stuff recorded still online, where the U.S. government out in like Nevada, or I think it was in Nevada, where they have the underground explosions where they're testing nuclear weapons underground. And I mean, just the power under there just to evaporate everything is massive. I could see us as a either we completely pacify the IRGC and take out their ability to fight, and then go in there and remove it by hand. That's one option. If they remain belligerent until the end and don't want to do anything there would have to be a massive bombing campaign. But I think we've only got about 51 GPUs left in our arsenal. Some of that's got to be set aside for China. Some of that's got to be set aside for Russia. I mean, those bombs are designated for different places and different targets. I mean, you got to think the U.S. has got the whole world mapped out right now. If we had to take out some place in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Turkmenistan, we already have those places marked out. Like, where are the key structures, key infrastructure things that cause or allow that nation to exist or to function? And we would say we have those bombs saved for those kinds of places. And so we don't have this unlimited number of GPUs that we can use, GPUs to be able to just use on whatever. We have a finite number, and we've already used quite a bit. We used 14 during the Operation Midnight Hammer to bomb the entrances to their nuclear sites. I don't know how fast they can make them, these bombs, but maybe why Trump told them, I think it was Boeing or Lockheed Martin or whoever, it's like, hey, you guys need to start building these things now and replenishing our stockpile, because we have a ton of missiles and we have a ton of weapons and we have a ton. But in particular, these kinds of ground penetrating, these massive ordnance bombs, the mother of all bombs is what they often call them. We don't have a infinite number of those things. We already used quite a few of them in this last go round of bombing things. So you would probably need a succession of those bombs, like 20 in a row, because I think some of these sites that they have built into the mountains are like 1,000 to 2,000 feet down. So I think I have the specification somewhere. Let's see. Let me just show this. Nope, it's not gonna work. Okay, so the GPU 57 Alpha Bravo massive ordnance penetrator is a 30,000-pound bunker buster. We had 12 MOPS per site used in succession in June 2025. 7 US B-2 bombers dropped 14 of these MOPS against Iranian nuclear targets in Fordo and Natanz. They're designed to penetrate up to 200 feet of earth or 60 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating, creating a collapse of tunnels and underground chambers. And I think this comes from Northrop Grumman, or at least the B-2 comes from Northrop Grumman stealth bombers. Let's see. The United States currently deploys both conventional and nuclear earth-penetrating weapons, or EPWs. The two largest conventional EPWs are the GPU-28 and the GPU-37. They use the same body but different guidance systems, and they can both are dropped from aircraft, and tests have shown that they can penetrate 6 meters of concrete or 30 meters of earth. The GPU-28 is laser guided, and the GPU-37 is guided by the GPS, and then it makes them more accurate. But the nuclear tipped one would create a strong seismic shock wave that propagates and can crush or damage underground bunkers. We have 9 megaton B-53s. It's a modification of the B-61-7 bomb with a new casing, variable yield from 0.3 to 340 kilotons. And all that to say, it may take a nuclear tipped earth penetrating weapon or one of these GPUs to actually cave in these tunnels and the lower levels of these places where this enriched uranium is being hidden or stored. So I could see that as one option for using a nuclear weapon in Iran. Because if we're not going to be able to secure that enriched uranium, nobody's going to. If we can't get it, nobody's going to be able to get it. We're going to just bury that thing so far down and make it so irradiated that nobody's going to want to get it. The second option is a lot more. It's more of a long shot, I think. But with the fracturing of NATO and the United States in terms of our relationship with them, obviously Trump can't simply pull out of NATO because of the congressional law they passed a couple of years ago. But he can defund it, and he can pull all the U.S. forces out of Europe. he can make the U.S. commitment as is hollow as the Canadians is to NATO, where we may only put in like 0.5% and have minimal manning across and basically be kind of worthless to the Europeans. Because of that, and I think also because of Europe's increasing emboldening of supporting Ukraine with arms and weapons and even technical know-how, that Russia could nuke something. Russia could nuke Ukraine as a show of force to say, hey, we are still a nuclear power and you are not going to that may be an option for them to get out of to end the war early, to nuke Ukraine or some other target. But I could also see them moving in on Estonia, taking Estonia or the Baltic states there. And I know that the Baltic states are more recent entries into NATO, and that would obviously trigger an Article 5 event. But how committed would the Europeans be in declaring open war against Russia if the United States is not backing them? So I don't know. Those are the kind of two options I see as being possibilities for nukes being used in 2026. From Good Breakfast 122, have you heard anything about the Iranian oil refineries clogging up or not working from high capacity? I heard that today, actually, that they're fearing that this is what's happening to the refineries there on Kharg Island. So if they're not able to offload their oil very quickly, then yeah, the refinery there is going to be just garbage, and it's going to take them forever. It's just going to be catastrophic to the Iranian economy, basically. Marine Mom, Texas, how much do you think we will observe before the rapture? I mean, I didn't know that we would see this much, honestly, but every day that goes by, every day we press closer to the rapture of the church, is every day we see more and more of the beast kingdom being built up. So I would venture to say that even before the end of this year, we may have a more solidified demonstration of artificial general intelligence. So Jensen Huang said that they had created AGI or had reached that level with some of their systems. If that's true, then we should see by the end of 2026, we should start seeing AGI it should move out of the realm of theoretical to now it's in reality. It's here, it's now, it's happening, and certain industries or companies are using AGI to do whatever. So I think that would be one big thing to watch. Another thing I think we could see prior to the rapture is the Israel reclaiming Judea and Samaria as exclusively Israeli territory or part of their country. And they had won it in the 6-Day War. So technically it's still theirs. But the world population, the world media and the Arab populations, et cetera, have been putting all this pressure on them. But we've seen that they're going to take some land out of Lebanon to create a buffer zone to push Hezbollah further back. The Syrians, Jelani is saying that he wants to reclaim the Golan Heights. Obviously, Hamas is still there in name only. I don't know if there's still any fighters there left, or they're all dead or imprisoned. But since Hamas was so integrated into the society, I mean, most of what we would call Gazans today, people that lived in Gaza, had some ties with Hamas one way or the other. So I do think that Israel could reclaim Judea and Samaria. They already voted on it in the Knesset last year when Vance was there. So that was more of a symbolic vote. But, as time presses on, and if this Iran war continues on for a little bit, or Hezbollah keeps firing, Israel's going to do what they have to do to survive. And I think that there's no way that they're going to be able to be dwelling securely in their own land when they don't control their heartland. So they're going to have to control their heartland at some point. So I think this year is as good as any for them to just go ahead and formally declare that it's 100% Israel, and they begin to rout out all the different Islamic factions that are small factions that are there causing problems. They're not going to just let that stand. So those are a couple of things I think of. What else could we see in this year or before the rapture? Obviously, disclosure event's going to happen. What that looks like, I don't know. But I would say most of the hard evidence, like the actual craft and these supposed, breeding programs, etc. I think a lot of that's held by private corporations, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, people like that. The U.S. government would have handed them all this technology back in the late 50s, early 60s, because once Freedom of Information Act became a reality or became law, the government now has plausible deniability because saying, "Hey, we don't have that stuff," and they don't. And they're not going to say, "Yeah, we gave it all to Northrop Grumman or Boeing or whoever," because they're not subject to FOIA. They're not subject to congressional oversight or committees or anything like that. So it makes sense that they would have shifted all of the really hard evidence over to these private organizations that aren't subject to government oversight. And all those people have long since been dead. So this black budget projects are an enigma to most people now, because we don't know who's got what. And what the U.S. government probably does have is like video evidence, photographic evidence, not multimedia, but multi-sensor evidence. And I would venture to say that some of the evidence is going to be very compelling, like the more compelling than anything we've seen thus far. And I guess a couple of things that'll come out of that is, one is the normalization of this topic, which was fringe 10 years ago. And now it's openly talked about by mainstream news. It's talked about from politicians, from, the president, from all over the world. So this whole topic has become normalized. And with the release of this evidence that the Pentagon has or the different intelligence agencies have, it is really going to bring it, I think it'll do more to normalize it than anything we've seen in the past. So the question won't be, are we alone? The question is, when are they coming back, or when are they going to show up, or, whatever. So I think that the whole conversation will shift at that point once this disclosure event happens. So it'll be undeniable. Whatever this evidence is that comes out, you won't be able to simply write it off as AI deep fakes or anything like that. It will be tangible evidence. But I think the hard stuff, the actual craft, the bodies, the biologics, whatever, I think those are being held by private companies. And I don't know if and when that'll ever be released. It should be released after the rapture, obviously, because I think that those things are going to show up in mass all over the skies, all over the world, to try and mask the rapture and trying to confuse people on what just happened. So, excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. Where did it go? T-Bum, Peter, anyone, do you think the Secret Service guy was hit by friendly fire at the hotel? The one Secret Service guy that was hit was shot by the shooter with a shotgun, but he had a vest on. So Aliens equal demons. Yep. Welcome, Joel Wilson. Good to have you here. Yes. Okay. So that Spielberg movie will be out in June. So a little over a month from now, that Disclosure Day movie will be out. What do we think about Charlie Bob King Charles, I guess, dropping in from England? I mean, he's coming over here with an agenda. Obviously, Trump has kind of a low opinion of, I don't want to say a low opinion of the royalty, but I'm sure that he probably disagrees with King Charles on more things than they agree on. So I don't know what they'll actually achieve coming over. He's probably going to come over and say, hey, we need you to really get back on board with NATO because we're not there yet. If the rapture does not occur in 2026, doesn't that essentially upset all the prophetic apple carts? No, it doesn't. And do we as a community begin to question the biblical understanding of our watchmen? I liken watchmen to, in a way, it's kind of like you're a weather forecaster or whatever. And I don't mean the guys on necessarily like on the nightly news, but like you got a lot of these channels that have come out in the last 10 years that do storm tracking and they do prediction stuff. They get a lot of things right. They're not always right, but you don't simply write them off because they got something wrong. I mean, these guys have an immense amount of knowledge. Even the young guys are, coming in with, degrees in meteorology and have a very deep understanding of weather systems and reading the radars and using all the different types of technology they use to even understand the everything they're looking at and reading. Do they get everything right? No. But I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater on that. As far as 2026 goes, that's simply our the final four theory on this, based on a 33 AD crucifixion, and simply because of the way that the patterns have held in the past, the 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, Abraham to Christ's first coming, Christ's first coming to a second coming. If that holds true, then we should see a rapture this year. Does it have to happen this year? No, because I hold to I'm going to hold to this as much now as I've done, since before the Final Four, that somehow 2033 factors into the tribulation in somehow, some way, some shape, some form. So if 2033 comes and goes and we're still here, then I would probably begin to rethink things. But then we would move in. We're well into this point. We're into the final Jubilee, which is the final 50 years. I guess this is the 120th Jubilee. So I don't know the exact Jubilee when Christ first came, but it happened toward the beginning of that Jubilee, not toward the end. So no, I don't think it does. Obviously, if I were like this prophet Joseph guy and I said the rapture is gonna happen on this particular day, and that day comes and goes, well, obviously, I was wrong. But neither Tyler or myself said that it had to happen in the final four. We just said, look, if the pattern holds true, then it should happen in these 4 years. We're not guaranteeing that it's going to happen. We just said it seems reasonable and plausible. And that's how do you do things in the scientific method? You have to test, you have to observe, is it repeatable? You look for pattern recognition. You look for, logic in the event itself? Does it make sense that it would line up with this, or why not? I mean, there's a ton of questions as why, or how people come up with conjectures on the rapture, and I think ours is pretty reasonable considering. You've got the Millerites, for example, back in the 1800s. They I forget the guy's first name, Joseph Miller or something Miller. He figured out that the Lord was going to come back in 1844 because he was doing a lot of math, right? And it was, I forget the exact reasoning why he did it, but he counted up the number of days and said, I think that's what it was. He counted the days out of Daniel, the 23 or 2520, 2,520 days, and he counted it from then as years until his day, which ended up being around 1844. And he tried to make the case that that's when the rapture would happen. Obviously, it didn't happen then. It didn't happen the next year. So that clearly that undertaking of looking at these, trading these days for years did not work out. And you could effectively write that one off because that time has came and went. Or the Harold Camping, Harold Camping had counted and I'm not even pretending to know exactly what he did, but it was something to do with Noah at the time of Noah, and he was counting the day count or whatever it was and converting it to years, and so that ended up being 1993 or 1994. That obviously came and went, and then he revised it and said it was in 2011, and then that came and went. So clearly those two were wrong. You have the guy in what's the guy's name? 88 Reasons Why the Rapture is going to happen in 1988. And he was looking at a generation as being 40 years. So 40 years from 1948 was 1988. And obviously that time came and went. So I think comparatively speaking, ours is very reasonable, very logical. It's happened in pattern. You don't have to do heavy math or Chinese algebra to figure out that it was roughly 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham. It was roughly 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ's first coming. And it was 2,000 years from his first coming, presumably, to his second coming. And if that all holds true, then that's mirroring the days of creation. And even the fact that Jesus came on the 4,000th year, which in creation day was the fourth day, which is the day that the sun, moon, and stars were created. Christ is called the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, Son of Righteousness, the light of the world. There's a lot of correlations that go along with it. So I think we have a lot of things supporting this idea, but neither Tyler or myself would say that it absolutely had to happen this year. So no, I don't think it's unreasonable. And I've looked at, you look at any topic, whether it's European Civil War, global war in general, the stock market, cryptocurrency, on and on and on. The weather. I mean, everybody's making predictions all the time about what they think is going to happen, and 90% of them are wrong. So I mean, we don't simply shut the stock market down because some people predicted some wrong stock prices or that it would rise or fall. We don't shut down all the weather stations because they got a forecast wrong. We don't. Why are we implying this either one size fits all or zero sum to just Bible prophecy, but then the rest of the world functions on this same kind of prediction manner? I don't know. I don't get it. So, okay. Well, that's really all I have for tonight. Thank you guys for hanging out and listening to my topic that we went through tonight about civilizational collapse. Hopefully that helped you to understand it a little more comprehensively. There's a lot happening in the world, and I think that we live in incredibly turbulent and perilous times, just like Scripture says we would. Paul said that in the last days, perilous times would come. Let's just quickly do a kind of a little exercise. Jesus said the last days would be terrible. That all of these bad things that he was describing, wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, pestilences, signs in the sun, moon, and stars, etc., that all those things would happen, and they have happened throughout history. But he said that they would happen like birth pangs. That once they started, they would begin to get faster and harder and faster and harder until you get to some kind of a culmination point. And I think we're in the opening thresholds of the birth pangs now. And the world has become so destabilized in so many different ways that it's even waking up the average people that don't think about Bible prophecy, the Joe Rogans of the world, who reading through Revelation 13, it was like, man, that sounds like the mark of the beast. Or, reading through Revelation, talking about the patents that we have for like these quantum dot tattoos and so forth. They were making that correlation, and to my knowledge, he's not a believer. I think he goes to church, but I don't think he's a believer, a born again believer. At least I don't think he is. But you have average guys like that can put 1 and 1 together and say, okay, well, that equals 2. But then you have the majority of these churches around the United States that won't touch prophecy with a 10-foot pole because they think it's too complicated or you can't know anything. That's bull. You can absolutely know. You can't know the day or the hour, but you can know the season. And like I mentioned earlier, those 2 technological capabilities listed in Revelation, it rules out every other generation before us. And how much further do we press into that going forward? It's anyone's guess. We don't know. I mean, ultimately, only God knows that. Whenever the full number of Gentiles comes in is the best reckoning that we have in terms of something tangible to tie the rapture to. I mean, unfortunately for us, we don't know what that number is. We don't know what the full number of Gentiles is in Revelation or Romans 11:25. So that's only known to God. So we have no idea what that is. But it would behoove us to go out and share the gospel with people and to bring in more people to salvation. And we're not responsible for the results, but we are responsible in the telling and the sharing and the doing. That salvation only comes through Jesus Christ, that he is the door by which, the only door that you can get to salvation is through him. In his finished work on the cross, in his shed blood for our sins. God himself became a man, born, out of a woman, right? The immaculate conception, or the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit on Mary to cause her to be impregnated and giving birth to, as a virgin, giving birth to Jesus, who then makes himself the most vulnerable of all of us. He comes forth as a little baby and then lives a perfect life from then until the time he is crucified, sinless, the only innocent man that's ever lived. And he willingly went to the cross and died for our sins so that salvation can be opened up to all mankind. And salvation is yours for the asking, really. You don't have to pray 5 times to Rome, or you don't have to do all these kind of penance, or you don't have to, climb up a mountain on your knees, or donate half of your paycheck to the church, or any of that stuff. None of that. You don't have to go to church. It's nice if you can find a good church to fellowship in and stuff, but many folks here don't have a church to go to because either they don't have a church around them, or all the churches around them are garbage. And I would just say that when you believe on the finished work of Christ, when you call out for him to save you, that he will. And then the minute that he saves you, the second that he saves you, according to Ephesians 11:1, or Ephesians 1:11 through 14, you're sealed by the Holy Spirit at that moment of belief. Sealed until the day of redemption. You cannot be unsealed, right? So I don't like to say once saved, always saved. I say once sealed, always sealed. Once you're sealed by the Holy Spirit, you're sealed. There's no undoing that. So if you don't know who Jesus is now, I recommend you just praying wherever you are. Jesus, if you're real, show yourself to me, or let me know you're real. I want to believe in you. If you're doubting, just simply ask him to reveal himself to you, and he will. God's not afraid to be challenged by anything. And when he does reveal himself to you, it'll be in a way that you will blow your mind. You're just like, what? I didn't see that coming. With that said, it's the most important decision you'll ever make. And really, although everything else pales in comparison, once you become a believer, salvation is done into three tenses, as it were. You believe on the finished work of Christ. You become born again and sealed by the Holy Spirit. That's the justification part, because it's not you're not justified by your good works. You're justified by Christ's perfect works, right? And then the next stage, you're already saved now. So now you move into sanctification, and that is a lifelong event. You're in the process of being saved. And whether you live a year or day, a week, 100 years, however long you live after you become born again, you're in the process of sanctification, where you're being molded to become more Christ-like each and every day. And then the last stage of this is the future tense, which is the glorification, which at some point the rapture is going to happen. You're going to exchange this mortal body, this corruptible body, for an immortal body and an incorruptible body forever. The rapture doesn't change you into a wispy spirit that you just float around for all eternity. No, you're going to be in a permanent, glorified body that's indestructible. And not only is it indestructible, but you'll never have love handles. You'll never have, pimples. You'll never have cancer or high cholesterol. None of that. You're from there on out, you're perfect. I can just call it your Superman body. I don't know how else to call it. You're just going to be impervious to everything. And that'll be the permanent form that you're in for the rest of eternity. So justification, one-time event; sanctification, lifelong event; glorification, one-time event. And that's this process of salvation that every believer is going to go through in this particular dispensation. So all that to say, thank you guys for hanging out tonight. Again, I'll be in Mississippi this weekend, Flowood, at the Sheraton with Tom Hughes and Alex Newman and the Gauchers. At the end of May, I'll be in Boise, Idaho, at the 412 Church there with Tom Hughes, Brandon Holthouse, Billy Crone, Ricky Scaparo, and then myself. And then June, I'll be with Lamb and Lion Ministries. We'll be speaking at McKinney. So if you go to Lamb and Lion Ministries and you're in the North Texas area, just go to their website and look for events, and then you should be able to find the McKinney event. Nathan Jones, Tim Moore, and myself. And then there's another fellow speaking. I don't know him off the top of my head, but I think he's from Answers in Genesis or the Creation Institute, something that I think to do with creation. And then in July, I just added a new one. I'll be up in Guthrie, Oklahoma, at the First Southern Baptist Church there with Pastor Greg Hudson and his fine folks there. It'll be mid to late July. We'll nail down a particular Sunday, and I'll just be speaking there on a Sunday. So that's in the Oklahoma area. Then August, I'll be in Roseburg, Oregon, I believe August 10th. Colorado in September 10th and 11th. That'll be at Fort Collins area, Steve Schmutzer's group in the Solid Bread community. And then the end of September will be in Belfast, North Ireland with Pastor Gary in the church there, Victory Church in Belfast. So that's all I got thus far. The Lord's keeping me busy. I just finished editing the book. I sent that off a couple of days ago. I'm going to finish working on my slides, and then I should be getting back to writing my weekly articles. I'll be posting John Bellum's new article tomorrow, and I think Randy's got a new one as well. So all that to say, thank you guys for hanging out. Love to you all. God bless you, and stay strong in the faith. Keep looking up. Don't let anybody steal your crown. We know we're close. We don't know exactly how close, but we do know we're close. So Maranatha, come quickly, Lord. God bless.